You're listening to NFT 365, the first daily podcast on NFTs with your host, Fanzo.
What's up, friends? Welcome back to another episode of NFT 365. You know, we're pushing into the hundreds now, right? And it feels good. It feels, exciting, but it also feels a little bit unsettling. It feels a little bit like maybe at one point a month ago, it felt like we knew what we were doing in this space. And now it feels like things are getting a little out of control. And I don't know, today's been like a music day for me. And I am a big Dave Mathews Band fan. I'm not going to play any of his music or sing any of his music because I know he is a little bit anal about the copyright or playing your songs. But, I kind of wanted to theme this episode on this, some of the titles from his songs, right? With this idea of like, we spend a lot of our time like really focused on where we are going, right? Like, where are we going in the future? How are we going to get mass adoption? What is the next blue chip? Where are all the utility and the roadmap and things are going? But then I don't think, like, for me, we're not spending enough time really in that space between, right? The space between understanding kind of like some of the nuances, and as these different trends kind of emerge and change, it's also going to change or shift the way that we're doing things. And then I think on top of that, one of the things that I stress a lot here on this podcast, and I feel like it's a soapbox that I won't be getting off anytime soon. So for those that may be thinking like, oh, maybe Brian's going to get off the soapbox at some point, probably not going to happen. And that's that, like, each person that's listening to this podcast, everybody that is listening and watching and part of this, experience, everyone has like kind of their own version of what success looks like. And I think any of us would sign up for a blue chip, right? Any of us would sign up for an opportunity to have like a really amazing NFT, like just pop off and you make that 100x, right? The next Bored Ape Yacht Club. But I think there's way too much time actually focused on that and trying to get like lucky in the lottery on like where we are going, and not enough time looking at like kind of the mechanics and things that are kind of happening across our landscape. And I wanted to kind of touch a couple things. There's a project coming out today, the Invisible Friends. Actually, I think it's minting. They did a charity auction for their one of one gold, and it sold for 500 ETH. So kudos to them. And the project's really interesting, right? One of the trends that we're seeing right now is that, I've complained a lot about like the whitelist grinding, and like the good old boys club. And what we're seeing, and we're seeing this on Loser Club, we're seeing this on Invisible Friends, we're seeing this in Star Catchers, a lot of these projects that have come out recently, that they're actually making their discords, making their environments private. They're actually making it really hard and exclusive for you to get in behind like those gated walls. And one of the trends that I predicted, I think it's back on like it actually might be episode 1 of this podcast. If it's not episode 1, it's like in those first 3 episodes, was I predicted that we're going to see a trend, in the springtime of people playing with the collection numbers, not only in how that they're doing the NFT drops, but even in total collections, right? Because basic supply and demand, I think we all know how that works, right? If there's less supply and equal demand to what it has on other projects, of course, the value is going to increase. And so like the idea that every project has to be a 10,000 piece collection or around that, right? Like some collections do it 11,193, like the Meta Whips, or 9,998 or whatever that may be. But like, I actually feel we're going to see more collections kind of not only, cause like we have this like Genesis founders passes, and then like phase 2 and phase 3, phase 4. But I'm really interested in the idea of like, I'm so a fan of expansion projects, right? And we have derivative projects, and expansion projects and derivative projects are without question a necessary evil. And I don't even think they're evil. I'm a huge fan of multiple expansion projects, but in a way they're actually more. They're more a byproduct on the fact that a lot of the entry point, a lot of the mainstream attention that we're seeing in this space comes from people that see a Bored Ape. but then they realize that they can't afford a Bored Ape. So they're like, oh, well, the Bored Apes have the mutant apes. And then they realize now they can't afford a mutant ape. And like, where is that entry point? Because maybe it is the ape art that people are attracted to. And one of the things that I think we're seeing more and more of is that, we have like the expansion apes, which I'm a fan of as well, and a project holder. But the bigger piece of this is like Invisible Friends is dropping as a 5,000 piece collection, right? So they're only going to have 5,000 in their collection. But I actually think one of the things that they did, probably in my opinion, like very strategic from like, and this is just me guessing. I wasn't on the whitelist, or I'm not part of the project. I'm not minting one right now. So as I feel like the floor price is going to be out of this world pretty quickly. But one of the things that they did from the outside in is they made the barrier to entry a very like methodic process, right? So what I mean by that is like if you wanted to get on their inside of their Discord and part of their their pre-sale list, you had to do things like fan art or participate in their games or get a PO-op or multiple PO-ops. And real quick, huge shout out to all of you that are out there that are playing in our very first pop proof of podcast that we just dropped 2 episodes ago. Holy cow. I will tell you, I'm sorry the website's a little slower than we planned, but it's because I didn't know that so many of you that were going to jump in and participate. But back to Invisible Friends, what they did is they made it really hard and required a lot of effort to get into that community, to get the access to spend your money on something. And so the byproduct of this, like the reason I actually think of this as like a really interesting trend is that if you work really hard to get into something and you get inside of it and you really like it, guess what? The likelihood of you actually being able, of you, staying in the project, right? Well, actually, I think let's flip it the other way. The likelihood of you buying with your whitelist spot goes up because you worked so hard to get in there. The likelihood of you buying and holding on to it goes up because you're like, hey, I worked that hard. I want to be a part of this community long term. And so in a way, that can be like a very exciting, byproduct. And I think, one of the things we have to kind of look at there is like, that can be a benefit, but it also can be kind of a limitation, right? And, I've talked about this on the podcast pretty often, that like, the total amount of holders versus the total amount of supply, there's like a sweet spot in there, right? Because like the crypto dads, they have a lot of individual holders, one of the highest individual holder projects, but that means there's not a lot of supply. Now, the beauty of this, and this is what I call the space between, the space between is that, there's a magic in the sense of if there's not as many people putting their NFTs up for sale, that means you have a better chance of controlling the floor price, right? So if there's only, let's say there's only 5% of a total of a 10,000 piece collection that are currently up for sale, the opportunity to buy up the floor, buy up the lowest priced ones is higher, right? There's a lot less in that like kind of levels. And you'll hear people talking about that on Twitter a lot. It's something that I watch a lot, is like the floor price I don't really care about. What I care about is like, how many are listed at the floor? What is the price gap? And then the thing I like to always pay attention to is like, what is the average sale of an NFT look like? What are the average sales that they're a part of? But the thing that I actually think is interesting when we look at this, like taking a step back, is it actually goes into what I've talked about for 8 years. Is if you focus on taking your early fans, turning them into super fans, turning your super fans into your like mega fan, like the lifelongers, right? Like the season ticket holders, right? And then what happens is they end up doing some of the onboarding and marketing for you. But there's also another byproduct to this, is that when people like love their NFT project, when people are so committed to it that it's their profile photo, maybe they buy the merchandise, maybe they put put the things on the wall, the likelihood of them selling it because all of a sudden the price goes down, right? Or getting scared and hitting a certain price point and then ejecting is actually goes down, right? Because they're like pot committed, right? And I always like to tie things back to poker references, but like once you're pot committed, you're not folding, right? You're like, I already put in so much money that my percentage in makes me the worthwhile of me, like the chance I have of winning this hand is equal to or greater the amount of money I've already committed to this pot that I might have to already commit on top of that. So I'm all in no matter what, right? Like that's a poker reference, but that also exists here in this NFT space. And so the interesting part of this is that there's also different emerging kind of ebbs and flows of these different NFT projects. And like, this is why for me, weirdly, I've spent the last 3 days not focused as much about what are the upcoming NFT projects, but I've actually been going back and looking at projects in November, in December, and January, and trying to better understand the trends. One of them, for example, is the MFers. Anyone that's familiar with the MFers, it's a meme style NFT. And for me, I actually got in on an MFer right at the very beginning, and I ended up flipping it. I flipped it pretty early because I was like, oh, this is cool. Art's kind of decent, and I doubled my money, I think, in 48 hours. But I kind of wish I held on to it now because I think I sold it at like 0.6 ETH, and I believe the floor now for MFers is somewhere in like the 5 ETH mark. But the reason I wanted to share that one was I wanted to go back and look at like what were some of the things that changed in that project from those early days to this like rocket ship that it's on right now. And in some cases, we don't know, right? There's too many variables, right? Like, did all of a sudden people in the Discord just like really rally together? Did all of a sudden the public attention to the project all of a sudden come in and people were willing to pay more for it? Did one whale come in and buy up a bunch of them so that they can control the market, control the floor? Those type of things, like the variables when we're studying, especially when we're Monday morning quarterbacking, right? We're going back, can be very overwhelming. But I like to look at like the kind of like the more macro trends of it, right? Like even something like how long after the art reveal did the project come back to its highest point? So this is one of the numbers that I've been looking at a lot lately, was that if it takes a longer time for a project to come back to its highest pre-reveal price, then it's actually a trend that I've noticed that it's actually gonna be a much longer grind of that project. Now, with that being said, there's also this idea of like what goes up must come down, right? And like we know that's part of this conversation as well. But I think the beauty of that is like things will go up, then the market will correct itself and it'll come down. Like it'll go up 100%, it'll come down about 30%, and it'll go back up about 60%, right? And so you're kind of slowly going up on that market. But there's other projects that have gone up and then completely fallen down, and now have taken a long time to even make up half of their total value of their height that they were at one time. Now, why is all of this important? Because for me, one of the things we talk a lot about is like mass adoption, Coinbase coming on, where are things going? But here's the funny part about this is that I believe a lot of the current NFT projects are going to have a choice of innovating, not just having a metaverse, not just buying land on NFT worlds or Decentraland, not just having a very active Discord, but like what is the role of like AR and VR? What is the role of bringing in new artists? What is your onboarding strategy for getting new people into the project when the floor price hits a certain amount? Right? I don't think a lot of projects are actually thinking about that, right? Like when your NFT project reaches a 5 ETH floor, which right now, let's just say when the minimum to get into your project is 10,000 USD or higher, how are you going to bring in new blood or people that want to be fully active with your project that can't afford that higher entry point, right? And we've seen, projects, with the derivatives of that, or like the Lazy Lions are doing the Cubs, and there's lots of these different other pieces. Other projects have actually taken a different approach, and they're doing multiple NFTs into one, right? So Psychedelics Anonymous, which is a project that I minted myself. I'm a huge fan of that project. I'm trying my best to get the founder of Vultra on the actual podcast. But one of the things I like that he did on that project was you have your Genesis NFT, But then there's also 3 additional NFTs. Like one's a merchandise one, one's a metaverse NFT access, one's an IRL NFT access pass. And I think that's a really creative way of allowing people to kind of build their bag, to sell their NFTs, to buy additional ones without having to buy like the main NFT. And so all of this to me kind of plays into a couple different realms, right? And I know, I believe, I don't like saying like I'm the one that coined a term, but I do believe I coined the slow burn concept, right? I think if you go back and look at episode 3 or 4, I came up with that term. I made it up on the fly, and maybe someone else said it before me, and I don't really care about who said it first. But one of the things that I've noticed with slow burn projects is that there's a difference between a slow burn project and a project that has lost momentum. There is a difference between a slow burn project and a project that has a massively active core group of people that love everything about their project. Because in some cases, I actually think it's better when an NFT project just cuts off their mint and says, that's going to be the total amount in this collection. In other cases, I like the slow burn mint out, right? We have the Wild Goat Gang, which is a project I talked about here on the podcast. Shout out to them. You know, they were a slow burn, but I love, like, every time I jump in their Discord, the activity, the camaraderie, the people getting together offline, and you know, all of those things kind of coming together are pretty amazing, right? And then you have like the ultimate of ultimate slow burns, which is the crypto skulls, right? And you know, Drew, who's, you know, business partner here on the podcast, shout out to Drew Cohen, is a big fan of the Crypto Skulls project, which is arguably one of the earliest of early NFTs. And apparently that project took 3 years to mint out, right? 3 years. I mean, that's like the slowest of all slow burns. But now it's kind of gaining like this like cult-like following. And part of it is like the nostalgia and the art, also the nostalgia and like supporting those that have been there before us. But here's the thing that I want us to think about, and it's kind of the last saying of the Dave Mathews Band quote, right? Which is, what would you say? And when I say, what would you say, one of the things I want us to look at is, when you're thinking about the projects that you want to be involved in, I am not a flip shamer, because I'm flipping NFTs myself. I think today I might have listed about 60 NFTs in my bag for sale. All kinds of different reasons for doing that, but I have a lot of NFTs that I have that I've currently listed for sale. I'm not dropping them to the floor to get rid of them, but I'm posting them up for some 7-day listings right now. But the thing about this that I think is so interesting is that we are often focused about the next blue chip and the next project to take off. But I actually think we should actually look at it and say, what is the next 10 projects that are going to maintain a 2 ETH floor for 6 months? Because I actually think if we focus more of our attention on the mechanics to become a project that is you know, one of those projects that has done an amazing job, right? Like, I mean, World of Women might be, you know, they're on their way to like a blue chip level, but I would take a look at a lot of these projects that over the last 6 months, what are the nuances to them to where they got to a certain point where it just looks like their floor will never dip below a certain amount? Because now we want to be able to build off of that, to learn off of that. And the other part of this is that, you know, as we come out of this global pandemic, the more we lean into the trends, the more we lean into educating the masses, the more we lean into the idea of like entry points, the more I believe a lot of these projects that right now have been kind of stalled out are going to thrive if this is the thing I'm looking at right now. When people are joining into a new community, if they feel just as welcome as those that have been there for many months, and it's not about like, hey, you missed out, there's a high likelihood, I believe, that projects like their all-time high is in the future. There are other projects that are like, when you jump in, you're like, hey, I'm so glad I just jumped into the Discord. I bought my first, you know, whatever the NFT is. And people are like, oh, it's about time. What took you so long to get in here? Oh, you only have one of them? Well, these are all of us that have 5. And there's almost like this like shaming of like where people come into the entry point. And then the last thing I wanted to kind of just, mention and think about this when, the amount of, because this is that weird part about community, right? Community requires people that all members of a community feel as though they are giving as much as they are receiving. Now, it doesn't have to be in the exact same transaction, right? So it's not like if I'm giving this amount of time, I need this amount back in time in return. But it could be something like I'm giving this amount of money to this project. I want to be able to get this amount of education, right? Or access to networking or whatever it may be. I think a lot of projects right now are in this weird limbo of trying to build a community, and they're turning into a network. They're turning into just a group. And it's kind of like the Facebook groups we've all seen, right? When Facebook groups get to a certain scale or they've been around for a certain amount of time, what happens to most online Facebook groups? The value starts to go down. People stop being as active. The founders stop caring and they kind of plateau out. I believe that the magic of where we need to be looking right now is actually not going back to the early days because times have changed, but not focusing on the future. I actually believe it is that space between, shout out to Dave Mathews Band, on understanding what is that space between these worlds, right? And how do we get there, right? How did projects like Mechaverse go from so high to so low, and what are they doing right now to maintain a 1 ETH floor, right? What are some of the projects that launched recently at a very high mint price? Because, don't get me started. Like, here's the thing, and I'll kind of wrap on this, is if the price point is higher, people's risk is higher. And in many cases, when their risk is higher, their tolerance for volatility is actually less. Right? Because if they risked more to get in, right? If they took more of their liquidity, if they borrowed money from their spouse and they were like, this is my one project. If all of a sudden the floor price dips or if the founders are less active, because they took so much risk to get into the project, their likelihood of getting rid of it is actually increased. If I look at my NFTs that are in my bag, when I was listing a bunch of them today, there's a lot of projects in there that I know that I bought into them at 0.04, 0.06 ETH, and I kind of feel like I can just ride with them. And, they've had some, they get up to 0.5 and they come down. There's other projects that I jumped in at 0.3, 0.4 ETH, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like it's down to 0.18. I'm ready to get the hell out. But like, funny enough, like my loss actually there is actually less, but because of that higher risk entry point. And so I think, the variables that we have to watch for are how many collections are going to shrink their total supply below 5,000. How many projects are going to make the exclusivity, because this is the magic sauce, right? You want to be inclusive, but you want to be exclusive because you want for a community to be successful, you need that red rope outside of the nightclub, right? Where when you drive by the nightclub, if there's nobody waiting out in line, you're like, man, that nightclub must suck. But then if you drive by and like there's a bunch of people waiting in line, you're like, oh, it must be popping. Now you don't know what's on the inside. They might only be at 30% capacity out there, and they're using this like appearance of demand to drive people to stop at that nightclub. But I think these are the things we have to look at is like, how do people get people involved pre-launch? How do they keep people involved post-launch and pre-reveal? How do they keep people involved post-reveal and pre-roadmap execution? And then the last thing I'll say, and then this kind of goes into what would you say, is I don't think a lot of projects right now are thinking a year out. I don't think a lot of NFT projects have decided what are their budget that they need. How are they going to get to that budget? What's the transaction volume they need to have over the next 6-9 months to make sure they're set up for 12 months from now? And I think that's a scary thing because there are some projects that I know that dropped in July and August that didn't even have a plan for December. And they've been struggling. They've been having a hard time. So with all that being said, I wish all those that are minting Invisible Friends best of luck. I wish everyone that, for me, like part of this that I just love is like, I just love geeking out with the data. Like I spent like last night, it was like 2:00 in the morning and I was going through like just analyzing some of like the data on like, okay, what were these 5 projects floor price in middle of December, and what are their floor prices now? And what can I kind of assume, or what kind of leaps can I take to assert myself to understand why those things kind of happened? And so that's kind of the fun for me. I think I'm really not looking at like what is the next blue chip. I'm looking at what are the next projects that I can, in the next 3 months, what projects can I get into that I believe will have a 5 ETH floor by the end of the year. I actually think if your strategy is there, you're going to have more success than you're trying to figure out what the next Bored Ape is, what the next World of Women is, what the next CryptoPunks is, because I think there's a lot of unknown variables and unknown future, and we don't really know where we are going. But I love looking at that space between. As always, you guys know that we are super powered by the ADHD coin over on Rally. Make sure you guys check it out, ADHDcoin.com, and you can get yourself some ADHD coin. Remember, this is not transaction. You're not sending me coin. By you simply holding coin in your portfolio, it actually increases the value of everybody else's coins that are holding coin. So if you currently hold ADHD coin, get friends, get your family to get in there, buy a couple dollars, 10, 20, 30, $100 worth of ADHD coin. And the more people that we have holding the coin, the more supply of the coin, the higher the coin price goes, and even the more value that we can provide here on the podcast. So until tomorrow, my friends, make it a good one. Cheers. All right, thanks for watching on video. I had this little graphic going here the whole time. It was kind of annoying. It kind of annoyed me a little bit. But hopefully you guys enjoyed that episode of the podcast. Hey, this is what it's all about. We're testing things out. I have been having a lot of fun geeking out on like the data and the trends and the macro and micro side of the house. And, it's a lot of fun. Also, I love my Chipotle. It's not sponsored. But I had Chipotle for lunch. I usually use that to incentivize myself to do my tasks in the morning. And if I get everything done that I need to get done in the morning, then I reward myself with Chipotle. And today I did that. So hopefully you guys are taking care of yourself, take care of your mental health, and don't forget to reward yourself. Be your own biggest champion, your own biggest cheerleader. And I'll see you tomorrow.